The moment she ignores you, your emotions want to rush in and take control. Your mind starts asking questions, creating stories, searching for meaning where none has been given. Most men mistake this moment as something that needs to be fixed immediately. They think silence means rejection, disrespect, or loss, and that belief pushes them to react. They send messages they don't mean, ask questions they're afraid of the answers to, or change their behavior just to regain attention. But that reaction doesn't restore control, it gives it away. Silence, when used correctly, is not weakness, it's restraint. And restraint is one of the clearest signs of inner strength. A high-value man understands that emotions are temporary signals, not instructions. Just because anxiety shows up doesn't mean he follows it. Just because uncertainty feels uncomfortable doesn't mean he rushes to escape it. He allows the emotion to exist without acting on it. And that pause, that space between feeling and action, is where control lives. Reacting immediately when ignored is usually an attempt to soothe your own discomfort. It's not about connection, it's about relief. You want the tension gone, the uncertainty resolved, the silence broken. But when you act from that place, you communicate need without saying a word. You show that your emotional state is dependent on her behavior. And once someone senses that, respect begins to erode. Silence flips that dynamic. When you don't react, you stay centered. You stay in your body instead of your thoughts. You stop chasing clarity and allow clarity to come to you naturally. This doesn't mean you're playing games or trying to punish her. It means you're choosing not to abandon yourself just to regain attention. You're choosing composure over compulsion. A man who can sit with silence without panicking is a man who trusts himself. He trusts his worth. He trusts that if someone wants to engage, they will. And if they don't, he doesn't force it. That trust is powerful. It shows emotional maturity. It signals that you don't need constant reassurance to feel secure, and that security is felt even in your absence. When you remain silent, you also gain perspective. You stop projecting meaning onto behavior that may not even be intentional. You stop escalating situations that don't need escalation. You allow time to pass, emotions to settle, and reality to reveal itself. Silence becomes a filter. It separates genuine interest from attention-seeking, consistency from confusion, respect from indifference. Control is not about dominance. It's about self-regulation. The man who reacts impulsively is being controlled by his emotions. The man who remains silent is choosing his response. And choice is power. You don't lose control by being ignored. You lose control by reacting without thinking. Silence gives you your power back because it keeps your behavior aligned with your values, not your fears. There's also something subtle that happens internally when you don't react. You stop feeding the narrative that being ignored diminishes you. You stop tying your self-worth to someone else's attention. You remind yourself that your value exists independently of who responds and when. That internal shift is critical, because once your worth is no longer on the line, silence stops feeling threatening. This is why silence is confusing to those who expect reactions. They're used to emotional responses. They're used to control through attention. When you don't play that role, the dynamic changes. But even if nothing changes externally, something powerful has already happened internally. You've chosen self-respect over impulse. Silence is not about waiting. It's about staying grounded. It's about not leaking energy into situations that don't deserve it. It's about trusting that what's meant to stay doesn't need to be chased. And what needs to be chased was never aligned to begin with. When you don't react, you don't lose your position, you protect it. And that's where real strength begins. When she ignores you, there's often an unspoken expectation attached to that behavior. Most people pull back assuming the other person will lean forward. They expect questions, explanations, emotional reactions, or reassurance seeking. It's a familiar pattern. Withdrawal creates pursuit, and pursuit restores attention. But when you don't react, you break that expectation completely. And that disruption is what creates confusion, not in a manipulative way, but in a psychological one. Human beings are wired to anticipate predictable responses. When a pattern is interrupted, the mind pauses. It reevaluates, it starts asking new questions. When she ignores you and you don't chase, her expectation of control collapses. She doesn't get the validation she assumed would arrive, and without that validation, attention turns inward. Curiosity replaces certainty. Reflection replaces assumption. This is why silence is so powerful. Not because it punishes, but because it removes reinforcement. Attention-seeking behaviors survive on feedback. When feedback disappears, the behavior loses its purpose. By not reacting, you're not saying, I'm upset or I don't care. You're saying nothing at all, and that neutrality is what unsettles the pattern. Most men believe that staying silent will make them seem uninterested or weak. In reality, overreacting is what signals emotional dependence. When you rush to restore connection, you show that her attention regulates your emotional state. When you remain silent, you show that your stability exists independently of her behavior. That independence is unexpected, and what's unexpected draws attention. Silence also removes you from the role she unconsciously assigned you. You're no longer the one who fixes tension, closes gaps, or reassures insecurity. You step out of that emotional labor. And when you step out, she feels the absence of the role you once played. That absence often creates discomfort, not because you did something wrong, but because the dynamic has changed. Confusion isn't about manipulation, it's about forcing a pause. A pause is where awareness lives. When you don't react, she's left to sit with her own behavior. She wonders why you didn't respond the way she expected. She starts questioning her assumptions. She may replay interactions. That reflection can't happen when you're constantly filling the space with explanations or emotion. Another important shift happens within you. When you don't react, you stop performing for approval. You stop managing perception. You simply exist in your own frame. That internal alignment strengthens your presence. And presence is felt even in silence, especially in silence. Silence also restores polarity. Pursuit collapses attraction because it removes tension. Silence reintroduces it, not as drama but as space, and space allows desire to breathe. When everything is immediately available, it loses value. When something is calm, grounded, and not chasing, it becomes intriguing. It's important to understand that silence isn't passive. It's intentional stillness. You're not frozen. You're choosing not to act prematurely. You're letting time do what words can't. Time reveals intent. Time exposes patterns. Time shows whether someone reaches out because they value you or because they expected you to chase. By staying silent, you also protect yourself from misreading the situation. Not every pause means rejection. Not every delay means loss. But reacting as if it does often creates the very outcome you fear. Silence prevents unnecessary damage. It keeps the door open without forcing it. And if she never reaches out again, silence still served you. Because it preserved your dignity. It kept you aligned. It stopped you from begging for attention that wasn't freely given. That alone is a win. When you don't react, you don't just confuse her, you clarify yourself. And clarity is always the stronger position. When you stop reacting and allow silence to exist, something important happens. The truth begins to surface on its own. Most men stay confused because they never allow enough space for reality to reveal itself. They chase answers, demand clarity, and try to interpret mixed signals while actively interfering with the process. Silence removes that interference. It allows behavior to speak without interruption. Words can lie. Explanations can be emotional. Promises can be made in moments of guilt or pressure. But behavior is consistent. When you step back and stop reacting, you give her the opportunity to show you exactly where her interest and intentions truly are. Not through what she says, but through what she does next. This is why silence is one of the most honest forms of communication. When a woman values you, your absence doesn't go unnoticed. Your silence doesn't feel like relief, it feels like loss. She notices the shift. She feels the gap. And eventually, if the interest is real, she reaches out. Not because she was chased, but because she chose to reconnect. That difference matters. Connection that's chosen freely is far more meaningful than connection that's pressured. On the other hand, if silence is met with continued distance, you've received clarity without confrontation. You didn't have to beg for answers or put yourself in a vulnerable position just to hear a half-truth. The lack of effort becomes the answer. And while that can be painful, it's also liberating. Because now you're no longer guessing, you're no longer stuck hoping. You're free to move forward with dignity. This is where many men struggle. They want certainty immediately. They want reassurance now. But real clarity doesn't arrive on your schedule. It arrives when the environment allows it. Silence creates that environment. It removes pressure. It removes emotional noise. And it gives space for genuine intention to emerge. When you keep reacting, you blur the signal. You create confusion where there didn't need to be any. You give mixed behavior something to hide behind. Silence removes the hiding place. There's no one to perform for, no one to placate, just choice. Silence also protects you from self-deception. It's easy to misinterpret words when you want a certain outcome. It's harder to ignore consistent behavior. By stepping back, you see patterns clearly. You stop romanticizing potential and start recognizing reality. That awareness is painful at first, but empowering in the long run. Another powerful aspect of silence is that it removes emotional bargaining. You're no longer trying to earn attention or prove worth. You're allowing the connection to stand on its own. If it holds, it's real. If it collapses, it wasn't stable to begin with. Either way, you gain truth. When you don't react, you also give yourself time to recalibrate. You reconnect with your standards. You remember what you want, not just what you're afraid to lose. That internal clarity is just as important as external clarity. Because once you know what you're willing to accept, you stop tolerating what doesn't align. This is why silence is not avoidance. It's evaluation. It's choosing to observe rather than interfere. It's choosing long-term self-respect over short-term emotional relief. And that choice changes how you move forward, whether she returns or not. Silence doesn't guarantee a certain outcome. And that's the point. It removes illusion. It removes false hope. It removes dependency. What remains is truth. And truth, even when uncomfortable, is always the strongest foundation. When you let silence reveal reality, you stop guessing and start seeing clearly. And once you see clearly, you can move forward with confidence instead of confusion. When you choose silence instead of reaction, you're not just protecting the dynamic, you're protecting your self-respect and inner stability. Most men don't realize how much damage they do to themselves when they chase attention after being ignored. Every unanswered message, every extra explanation, every emotional reach chips away at their dignity. Not because caring is wrong, but because abandoning your own standards for reassurance teaches you to tolerate less than you deserve. Silence is a line you draw for yourself before it ever becomes a message to someone else. It says, I don't beg for attention. I don't chase validation. I don't abandon my emotional center just to feel chosen. That internal boundary is what keeps you grounded when uncertainty appears. Instead of spiraling, you stay anchored. Instead of questioning your worth, you preserve it. Inner stability doesn't come from knowing what she's thinking. It comes from knowing who you are regardless of what she does. When you react emotionally, you hand over your peace. You let someone else's behavior determine your state of mind. Silence takes that power back. It returns your focus inward where it belongs. Many men confuse silence with suppression. They think not reacting means bottling things up. In reality, silence is not avoidance, it's containment. You're allowing emotions to pass without letting them hijack your behavior. You're choosing not to externalize insecurity. That choice strengthens your emotional discipline over time. Self-respect grows when your actions align with your values. If you believe you deserve consistency, effort, and respect, then reacting to being ignored contradicts that belief. Silence restores alignment. It keeps you congruent. And congruence is what creates confidence, not bravado, not posturing, but quiet certainty. Another important aspect is that silence prevents you from saying things you'll regret. Emotional reactions often come from fear, not truth. Words spoken from fear tend to weaken your position and linger longer than intended. Silence protects you from that. It gives you time to settle, to regain perspective, and to respond later, if responding is even necessary. When you don't react, you also stop rewarding behavior that doesn't align with your standards. Attention is currency. Where you place it teaches people how to treat you. By withdrawing attention from inconsistency, you reinforce your values without confrontation. That reinforcement strengthens your sense of self, even if nothing changes externally. Inner stability also means you don't internalize someone else's behavior as a reflection of your worth. People ignore others for many reasons: confusion, distraction, immaturity, emotional uncertainty. Silence allows you to observe without personalizing. You don't jump to conclusions. You don't assume rejection. You stay neutral. That neutrality is emotionally powerful. Over time, this practice changes you. You become less reactive in all areas of life. You stop needing immediate answers. You stop chasing reassurance. You trust yourself to handle uncertainty. And that trust builds resilience. Resilience creates presence. Presence commands respect. Silence also preserves your dignity. If the connection fades, you didn't plead. You didn't chase. You didn't lose yourself. You walked away intact. That matters more than most people realize. Because how you handle being ignored becomes part of your self-image. And protecting that image is protecting your future confidence. When you choose silence, you choose yourself. You choose emotional maturity over impulse. You choose stability over chaos. And once you've made that choice enough times, it becomes natural. You no longer feel the urge to react, you feel the strength of restraint. And that strength is what keeps you grounded no matter what happens next. When you remain silent instead of reacting, something subtle but powerful happens. The emotional weight of the situation shifts away from you and lands where it belongs. Most men don't realize how much emotional labor they carry when they're being ignored. They analyze, wait, worry, replay conversations, and search for meaning. All of that weight sits on their shoulders. Silence removes you from that burden. It stops you from carrying emotional responsibility for someone else's behavior. When you react, you're unconsciously saying, I need resolution right now. You're trying to close the gap, ease the tension, and stabilize the connection. But when you stay silent, you're no longer trying to fix the situation. You're allowing it to exist as it is. And that changes everything. The pressure to respond, explain, or justify shifts to her. She becomes the one who has to sit with the silence she created. This shift is important because it restores balance. In any healthy dynamic, emotional responsibility is shared. But when one person constantly reacts, that balance disappears. One person carries the weight while the other stays passive. Silence rebalances the equation. You're no longer doing all the emotional work. You're allowing the dynamic to reveal itself naturally. Silence also introduces accountability without accusation. You're not calling her out. You're not demanding explanations. You're not expressing frustration. You're simply not participating in a one-sided dynamic. That absence is felt. It forces reflection because there's nothing left to respond to except the situation itself. When she feels the silence, she becomes aware of the space you've created. And in that space, questions arise. Why isn't he reacting? Why isn't he chasing? Why isn't he trying to fix this? Those questions don't come from manipulation. They come from disrupted expectations. And disrupted expectations lead to self-reflection. Most men try to provoke reflection through words. They explain how they feel, what they want, and what went wrong. But explanation often creates defensiveness. Silence creates introspection. It allows the other person to think without pressure. And introspection is where real awareness forms. Another important shift happens internally for you. When you stop reacting, you stop feeding the emotional loop. You're no longer refreshing your phone, rereading messages, or imagining outcomes. You step back into your life. Your attention returns to your purpose, your routines, your growth. That return grounds you, and grounded energy is steady energy. Silence also prevents escalation. Emotional reactions often create unnecessary drama. A simple pause turns into a misunderstanding. A delayed reply turns into a conflict. Silence stops that chain reaction. It keeps the situation neutral, and neutrality gives both people room to breathe. By staying silent, you're also communicating something important without words. I don't panic. I don't chase. I don't need to control outcomes. That message is felt even if it's never consciously acknowledged. It shows emotional maturity. It shows confidence. It shows that you're not afraid of space. And if she chooses to re-engage, it happens from choice, not pressure. That matters. Reconnection born from reflection is stronger than reconnection forced by reaction. It feels different. It's more genuine. And if she doesn't re-engage, the silence still served you, because you didn't drain yourself emotionally trying to hold on to something that wasn't reciprocated. Silence also teaches you patience. You learn to sit with uncertainty without being consumed by it. That skill transfers into every area of your life. You become calmer under pressure. You become less reactive in conflict. You trust time and behavior more than words. That trust builds wisdom. Ultimately, silence returns emotional responsibility to where it belongs. You stop carrying what isn't yours. You stop fixing what you didn't break. You stop chasing clarity that can only come from the other person's actions. And when you release that weight, you regain your strength and your peace. There comes a moment when silence stops being a strategy and becomes a statement of self-respect. This is where everything finally comes together. Silence is no longer about influencing her behavior or waiting for a response. It becomes about choosing yourself without explanation. And that is the most powerful shift a man can make. Most men think strength is about endurance, holding on, waiting it out, staying available no matter what. But real strength shows up when you recognize what no longer deserves access to your energy. Silence at this stage isn't passive, it's decisive. It's the quiet decision to stop investing where there is no reciprocity. And that decision reshapes your identity. When you stop reacting, chasing, or trying to be understood, you begin to notice how much peace you gain. Your mind clears. Your emotions stabilize. You're no longer tied to someone else's attention to feel grounded. That independence is deeply attractive, but more importantly, it's deeply freeing. You realize that your worth was never dependent on being chosen, it was always inherent. This is where most men finally reclaim their center. Instead of asking, "Why is she doing this?" the question becomes, "Why am I tolerating this?" That shift changes your standards. And standards are what determine the quality of your relationships. Silence becomes the boundary that says, "I don't need to announce my value. I live it." At this level, even if she does return, the dynamic is no longer the same. You're not waiting with hope or resentment. You're observing with clarity. You see behavior for what it is, not what you wish it to be. And that clarity protects you. It allows you to choose from strength instead of emotion. Silence also teaches you that closure doesn't come from conversations, it comes from acceptance. Many men stay stuck because they want one final explanation, one last message, one moment of validation. But closure is an internal process. It happens when you stop needing someone else to confirm what you already feel. Silence accelerates that process. As you grow comfortable with silence, you stop fearing loss. You understand that losing someone who doesn't value you isn't a loss at all, it's alignment. That understanding dissolves anxiety. You no longer rush to fill gaps or fix distance. You trust that what's meant for you won't require you to abandon yourself. This is also where your presence changes. People feel it. You move differently. You speak less but mean more. You don't over-explain or overextend. You're calm, composed, and grounded. Silence has refined you. It has stripped away neediness and replaced it with certainty. And here's the truth most people miss. Silence doesn't push people away. It filters them. Those who are unsure, inconsistent, or driven by ego fall away naturally. Those who respect strength, boundaries, and self-worth either step up or step aside. Either outcome works in your favor. At this point, you're no longer trying to win anyone back. You're focused on building a life that feels full without external validation. Your purpose becomes louder than your emotions. Your discipline becomes stronger than your impulses. And your silence becomes the proof of your growth. If she regrets losing you, that regret is no longer your concern. You didn't create it. You simply stop preventing it. And if she never looks back, you still win because you move forward without bitterness, drama, or self-betrayal. This is the final